So today I'm finally continuing the series of the top 10 albums that changed my life. This is the sixth installment. It is about compilation albums. So it is not a specific album that I'm going through like the five I did previous and the four after this that I'm going to be doing. We're going to talk about some specific compilation albums and why they were so important to me or the roles that they played in my life. But this is more about the concept of the compilation album. So we're going to talk in generalities too, just about how they were more important then than they are now, then being just before now, which we'll get into in specifics. Maybe some different types of compilation albums that there were and things like that, or that there are. And yeah, and again, why they're important to me, why they're on this list of top 10 albums that changed my life, for some very specific reasons, but also just the idea of them. So I guess first thing is there's a bunch of different types of compilation albums. I was not going to include soundtracks on this list. For some reason, it just was not what I was going to do, but I end up talking about them a bit, so I decided, oh, you know what, like, I guess I may as well have them on the list. But there is some type of weird discrepancy between soundtracks and other ones that I'm going to be talking about, which are generally compilation albums put out by a label, like a music label, or in some cases, we're going to talk about Van's Warped Tour. That's not by one label at all, but just, everyone who was on the tour for that season, like 50 plus bands or whatever, you get like 50 or so of these different artists on one album. There are other compilation albums that we're not going to get into at all, and I just want to recognize that I think that they are compilation albums, but I mean, there's like those, not anymore, but I mean, I guess on TV back in the day, there's like these infomercial type commercials of trying to sell you like, oh, the top pop songs of the 80s in 3-disc like compilation, and that's I bought one of those albums at a garage sale once, which I think was the '90s pop compilation of like all the best hits. I don't have any of those anymore. I don't know where that one went, and it's not really something that I'm going to get into that much here at all, other than just bringing it up now, because it is a compilation album, but it's almost like a time capsule. And I mean, every album is a time capsule in a way from a very specific period of time. Because even if it's just like a soundtrack, I mean, those are the songs that pretty much came out that year or were made for the movie or whatever. Any compilation album is drawing from a specific time period generally. But these were very specific. Like, this is the a decade of this genre that we think is the best, and we're putting it all together here for you. In some ways, a best hits album is a compilation, really. Even though it's like one artist, it's like, oh, these are the best hits. We're going to combine all these different albums, all these songs from different albums, and put them together. And that maybe isn't so a time capsule necessarily. I mean, it spans their career, but not as specific as some of these other albums. So I'm not going to get into those decade best hits compilations, and I'm not going to get into best hits from an artist. We're going to talk about compilation albums that feature multiple artists, where they only have one song on the album, and that's it. And yeah, we're going to get into that. So with that, there are some different kinds. I mentioned Van's Warped Tour. We're going to get into. I mentioned soundtracks, which I do want to talk about a little bit. Sometimes, so Metal Hammer puts out, or did for a long time with the magazine. They generally have these themes, these compilation albums with themes, which sometimes are pretty loose, sometimes not. This one's called Grave New World, which was, I believe, released in October, which is fitting for Halloween, right? And they, there's 15 different tracks on here from, songs that came out that year that maybe fit this theme. There's labels like Ryu fell. Oops. There's labels like Victory. When you buy their merch, sometimes they would send these out. Sometimes they were actually included as a second disc with like a CD that you would buy. I remember when I bought an Atreyu CD a long time ago, it came with like this extra disc that had music videos and had songs and stuff from other artists on the label as just like a promotionary tool. So I mean, the Victory ones, like I don't know how many I have, like 3 or 4, and you can't buy them. Like, I couldn't buy them. There's also digital ones, so like there's a great label, an emo label, and I don't mean emo like My Chemical Romance, The Used. This is more what I would call pure emo, so It's just a different thing. I don't know how to describe it, but it's not what I would call popular emo music. It's different. But Deep Elm, they had a thing where they were releasing these digital compilation albums, and you could download them for free. So that was a thing that they did. I don't think they release them for free anymore. I should have checked that, but I mean, it was a couple years ago when I stumbled upon it, and I was like, "Oh, sick!" And then I got all this free music, like 20 or something different compilation albums, and some of them were old ones that they did have as CDs. I remember that my friend had one. This would have been like 2004, called "Emo is Awesome, Emo is Evil," like Volume 2. And that was a compilation album that they released to buy, and so sometimes like these compilation albums are samplers from a label for promotional purposes. They give them out for free. They send them to you when you buy other things. Like I said, with Metal Hammer, I mean, other music magazines do it as well, where every once in a while they'll put a CD in there that's a compilation. It's kind of to get you to buy the magazine, maybe, is part of it. Yeah. So we'll kind of get into it here. So one thing, I did talk about soundtracks a bit. So I don't have the Godzilla soundtrack, but that would have been really the first compilation album that I ever bought. And it wasn't in the spirit of buying a compilation album, it was in the spirit of, this album seems to have some cool songs on it. And this, I don't remember when that movie came out. I never saw the movie, important fact. Like when Godzilla came out, whenever that was, and obviously there's been many Godzilla movies, but the one I'm talking about, it was just called Godzilla, I think, and it was like early 2000s, and I just remember thinking like, oh wow, there's like Puff Daddy's on there, and I don't remember, like I said, I really don't remember, maybe I didn't even buy it, maybe someone else bought it for me, but I just remember thinking like, oh, I know some of the songs on here. Jamiroquai was on there, like I said, there's that Puff Daddy with Jimmy Page. There's also, oh man, I think there was Rage Against the Machine. I know there was the song Brain Stew by Green Day. There was a bunch of songs on there, and I thought it was a pretty fresh album at the time. When, what did I know? I was like a teenager. Yeah, what do I know now? And I'm in my 30s. But that, like I said, it wasn't in the spirit of buying a compilation album. It was just like, oh, it was a cool album, I guess. Like, there's some stuff on there that I know I like. And it didn't really do much for me at the time. I remember I listened to it. I listened to a bunch of the songs off it, but I don't remember being like introduced to new stuff and being like, whoa, I should look that up. And that's something that I really need to talk about. Because I know I just showed you the Crow soundtrack. We're going to get into that. But the Godzilla soundtrack that I don't own anymore. The thing is that, like, at that time, early 2000s for me, like I had access to the internet at school. But even then, it's not like Facebook was around. Twitter wasn't around, Instagram wasn't around. Like, there was not a lot of social media at all, if any, like social media, really. Like, I don't even know if MySpace was around in the early 2000s, probably, but I don't know. It wasn't something I looked at. So there wasn't a platform for artists to have their stuff, and then I could go and check them out and whatever. Like, I could have looked them up and gone to their website. I'm sure there was a way for me to buy their stuff, or to maybe listen to some of their music, but not even nearly as accessible and convenient as we have it right now. Where, yeah, I can go on Facebook and check their stuff out. I can go on their YouTube channel, etc. That just wasn't a thing. So if there was an artist that I liked, tough luck, basically, for me, unless I wanted to go and find their album in HMV or CD Plus, the very limited amount of CD stores I could have found their stuff in, and then bought the album just based on the strength of what I'm calling this, on the strength of a single. So, that is something that I did do, and we're going to get into those examples, but it's generally something that, it's tough, and we're going to get into why. But that's why I said, like, that first one, I didn't really do anything with it, and there'll be more examples of that too, but despite the fact that I listened to it, that's all I really did. I enjoyed the songs on it for the most part, from my memory, but I didn't go out and be like, oh wow, like, who's this? I'm going to get more of their stuff. Like, some of the artists I already knew, like I said, Puff Daddy and Green Day. I didn't know Jamiroquai before then. Was that song Deeper Underground? At least that was the hook. Sorry for the frogs in my throat. Anyway, but yeah, I couldn't really do much with that. A little while later, I got this album, and I don't even know. Well, I mean, I knew I saw the movie before this, but I'm trying to think. Did I really know Nine Inch Nails before this? And it would have been around the same time. So I think that I'm correct in saying I knew Nine Inch Nails before I got this album. That was part of the reason I got the soundtrack. I watched the movie when it came out, and I was probably too young to really appreciate it. And I was still living in Lethbridge at the time as a kid, so that I don't know when the movie came out. Well, let's just look at when the soundtrack came out. Why don't we just be smart about this? Oh wow, this is in '94. So yeah, I would have watched it between '94 and '97, I guess, because I moved in '97, and again, I was too. I was like, I couldn't have been older than like 10 years old, so I didn't really get it. I didn't like the movie really. I don't know when I watched it again, but I'm sure I watched it again before I bought this. So, in my early teens, I probably watched it again, and I fell in love with it. I love the movie. The soundtrack was amazing. Around that time, I got introduced to Nine Inch Nails by a dude named Kevin in high school, and we'll talk more about kind of my influences and how those changed and stuff in high school as well. But yeah, so this was like a phenomenal soundtrack, and I bought it with the intention of like, oh, I know some of the songs on here, and I remember like, I remember other songs that were in the movie that I'm sure I would like, and I don't know who they are. And again, I didn't have much accessibility to go and do whatever. This was a case where once again, though, I didn't do much else with it. I really enjoy the soundtrack. Like, it's phenomenal. But I didn't go out really at the time. I didn't go out and be like, oh, the Jesus and Mary chain. Like, I really like that song they have on there, but who are they? Let me go look that up. Like, let me see what else they got going on. For some reason, it just never crossed my mind. Again, I had access to the internet. I didn't really have access to money, and if it was an album that was hard to find in like CD Plus or HMV, well, tough luck. I wasn't gonna get it anyway. I wasn't gonna buy it on eBay or like I don't even know if Amazon was a thing then. Like, so I enjoyed the songs on here. I really enjoyed the album. Again, didn't really do much outside of that. Didn't go searching for these bands. Like, I didn't even know who Henry Rollins was before this, and I probably didn't know right away when I heard this either. Just said Rollins Band, and I was like, I don't know. It's a sick song about Ghost Rider. I don't know how it fits into this album. That's basically how I thought of it. Which is another thing that I want to mention about soundtracks. And I didn't want to talk this long about soundtracks, but cool thing about soundtracks is that sometimes, more than other types of compilation albums, you get little goodies on there you wouldn't normally get. So a lot of these other compilation albums are just the song pulled from the album of the artist. It's the exact same album version. Soundtracks usually have some goodies every once in a while, like, hey, these two artists, can you collaborate together on a single for the movie, specifically written for the movie? It's not going to be on your album, it's not going to be on your album. Or like remixed versions, or in this case like covers, like the Rollins Band thing, like Ghost Rider is a cover of a other band, and so sometimes people do that as like a special thing to, obviously the movie or whatever, the production companies and stuff that want to sell this album are like, oh yeah, we need to provide some stuff on here that they're not going to find elsewhere. So that's a cool thing. But we're going to get to this. So this is the first compilation album that I bought that was not a soundtrack. So I got this in high school. I was just really getting into metal and heavy music at that time. So I had this little blip in time. Like, I didn't really... I talk about this in other videos about my passion for music and stuff and how that kind of developed. So I will say really quickly that like in grade 6 and 7, I had this thing where I was just listening to really popular stuff. And it wasn't necessarily pop music as much as it was popular gangster rap. Don't really know 100% how that happened. I do know some of it was influenced by my trips to Toronto. I did 3 trips in the summers to Toronto to see my dad. And there were some like family friends there. And like this one dude in particular just listened to a lot of gangster rap. So I came back reading the Source magazine, listening to Puff Daddy and Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre, and just like stuff like that. But didn't have a lot of access to different types of music, again, in that period of time either, but I did buy some of those CDs. And then in grade 8, I met this dude named Derek in high school, and he introduced me to metal and grunge, and it just took off from there. And then some of his friends, like I mentioned Kevin, they became my acquaintances and somewhat friends as well. And then, I would get exposed to music through him, and then got into some more other like different stuff. But generally from grade 8 to 12, those 5 years, I was pretty much just a metalhead, and I didn't really let a lot of other things in. And that's going to play into what we're going to talk about later. But in that time, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I just started getting into heavy music, and I bought this. The Return of the Rock. It's, MTV's Return of the Rock. I knew some of the bands on here at the time already, because, I was already into Slipknot and Korn. I knew who POD was. I didn't have any of their music. At that time I didn't know System of a Down. I don't think I knew who Kitty was. I didn't know Machine Head at that time. I think I might have known Cold Chamber. I was listening to some of this stuff, and I was also reading music magazines that introduced me to some of these names and stuff, but I still didn't have a lot of access or wherewithal or interest or whatever in looking them up online and then listening to their music to really see what it was like. So this is primarily from Roadrunner Records. Like, these artists are all on that label. So we're not getting this huge sampling of all the metal and hard rock that's out there and getting it curated together. We're getting something curated from Roadrunner specifically. They cut a deal with MTV somehow. They released this under MTV's name. Roadrunner is nowhere on the cover of this, but they are on the back and on the inside and stuff as well. It talks about how this is, Roadrunner Records. They had a lot of great artists, and they still do in this genre. So with this, I do remember being like, whoa, this album's like great, this is awesome, like I got introduced to this band and this band and this band. Some of those stuck with me a bit, like Dope is on here, and a remix of the song Everything Sucks. I didn't just go out and buy a Dope album. In fact, I never bought a Dope album, but there was a time years after this where I downloaded their whole discography because I was like, Dope is a band that, it's like, there's Limp Bizkit is here, and I can appreciate Limp Bizkit. I would even buy Limp Bizkit. But Dope is like a watered-down, shittier, shallower Limp Bizkit to me. And, I mean, in some ways they don't compare at all, but in the way that, I don't know, it's not the quality in the sense that you might think of like quality of music, but thematically, I don't know, like it's just shallow music. And sometimes I need that, but I wasn't going to pay for it. Not for Dope. It's not as well thought out or artistic as Limp Bizkit is, which is a weird thing to say. But anyway, so that's something that stuck with me. Like I said, like years later, I downloaded their discography. I can count times on one hand I've ever listened to a Dope song. But yeah, that was there. Static X, they're on this album. I never heard of them before this album. And then, I think it was within that year or a year later, I saw a Static X album, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that one song, I'm going to buy that album. So this is where I started to buy compilation albums, and it started to actually expose me to artists, and then I had some money or whatever, and I would just buy an album based on the strength of a single. That term is going to come up again. And there were songs on here that I just like, okay, so like Incubus, I knew I didn't like them. They had the song Drive Out that was huge, and I was like, bleh. But, they had the song called Pardon Me on here. I didn't really like it, but I didn't really switch it off either. So it was on here. I listened to it. There's a Kid Rock song on here. I'm not really a Kid Rock fan. I didn't listen to any more Kid Rock than what is on this album. I just never had any inclination to do so. Same thing with like POD. They were on other soundtracks, on other albums every once in a while. I didn't go and buy a POD record, but I listened to it in the context of this. Since high school, I've just always been a person who generally likes to listen to one artist or one album by an artist at a time. I really get into a mood, and that's the way I really consume my music. However, compilation albums, every once in a while, I am in the mood for a mixed CD. It was a really big thing to make mixed CDs when you could start burning CDs, and I took advantage of that through friends. I got them, like I mentioned, Kevin, he made me some burned CDs, and or some mixed CDs, burned CDs, and I would put together this like detailed like list and the order, the track listings, and all the stuff that I wanted. Sometimes they had a theme, sometimes they didn't. Generally, it was based off of songs that I hadn't even heard yet, but I was reading about in music magazines where they talked about they released a new album and there's this single, this single, this single, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I'll just get those on this burnt CD. And 80% of the time, it worked out really well for me. But yeah, there were times, especially then in high school, where more so than any other time, I was in the mood to listen to like different artists in one sitting. And generally, that's something that would happen like when cruising, just kind of like hanging out with people. When I was alone, I generally just I'd rather it be in a certain mood. And like this still, like if the album is curated very well, it still is a certain mood that you get, right? But it's just not the same as listening to one album by one artist or just like multiple albums by the same artist and being in that kind of place. I need to stop holding this up. But I'm going to actually put this in the car and listen to it later because I haven't listened to it for a long time and it's got some sick tracks. So, yeah, generally that's how I was consuming stuff and how I still consume stuff. But there is a time and a place where I feel like that. I would never put my iPod on shuffle, like all shuffle, because I've got too much music on there. Way too much stuff on there that I know I'm not going to want to listen to. I'm just going to have to keep hitting next over and over and over again. Probably kill the battery on my iPod just hitting next before I even get to a song I like that I want to listen to. But with these compilation albums, they are curated in such a way that that work is done for me already, and generally I'll just listen to the whole album if I'm in the mood for that. So that's going to bring us to Vans Warped Tour album 2004. This is the first Vans Warped Tour album that I got, and I have bought every single one since. It has been 15 years since this came out. So generally, they were double albums, or they were, 2 discs, and you get about 50 different artists throughout these 2 discs, and a song by each of them. This really, I mentioned before the thing about time capsules. So, this came out in this year. I listened to it that summer. I really, really attach a lot of memories to this album throughout that summer. So, it is a time capsule for sure. And it's not just when something like this, when I bought it as soon as it came out. It's different than The Crow came out, during this time, but I really listened to it years later, and so it's not the same because now that songs off there I don't attach to a specific period of my life necessarily, whereas these come out every year, and then this first one more than any other one, I listened to a lot, and I really attached to that year. Yeah. So anyway, after high school, because I graduated in this year. Towards the end of that, in 2004, I started getting into other things like screamo and emo music, and I do have a distinction between screamo and emo, and if you want to know that, you can watch the previous video where I talk about Alexisonfire's Watch Out, and how that album was really important to me, because I defined screamo right off the bat there. So, I was getting into more of that, some more punk stuff, some more whatever. It wasn't just metal and grunge. And so I knew some of the artists on here already. And this is where we go into talking more about buying an album on the strength of a single again, because there's some examples of hits and misses when I did that here. Again, I didn't have my own computer until I don't know how old. It was in 2007 or 2008 until I got my own computer, and I graduated in 2004. So whatever, do the math there. So again, Facebook wasn't really a thing. Social media with bands, blah, 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 blah. There wasn't as much accessibility. There's no streaming services. I didn't really... YouTube, I don't even know when I found out YouTube was a thing. So I wasn't listening to these songs first. Again, I was just buying an album that I saw in the store on the strength of a single that I heard on this compilation album that I bought in the same store. So, an example, Go Betty Go. The song Come On is on here. Female-fronted punk band. It's really light and fun. It has this cool energy. I really enjoy that song. This time around, I did not buy the album because I couldn't find it. I wanted to. Couldn't find it at my local record store. So I had a friend who had a computer, and then I just downloaded, I looked up the track listing and stuff, and I downloaded all the songs separately and in that really janky way, and they're all different quality and whatever. And I didn't like it. I didn't like the album at all. I was glad that I didn't buy the album, that I couldn't find it to buy, because I just wasn't that good. It just wasn't. But that single was good, and I still like that single. Now, on the other hand, From Autumn to Ashes, the After Dinner Payback is on here, and that's a killer song. And it blew me away. And I saw the album, The Fiction We Live, in the store, and I was like, hell yeah, From Autumn to Ashes, that's that band that, they have that one song, and it's sick, and I bought it, and I love that album. It's a phenomenally powerful, strong album. So I got into that band through here. Other examples, part of it was, their bands I already knew, right? Taking Back Sunday's on here, there's a good single on there. I already knew who Good Charlotte was. Thursday's on here, I knew who Yellow Card was. In some of these cases, I knew who they were, and I liked the singles they put out, but I didn't have the album. So this was just another, oh, wow, I actually can listen to that song whenever I want now, rather than having to watch it on Much Music or hear it on the radio or whatever else, because I didn't have any other way to listen to it. And so that was that. I mean, there's bands on here that I got exposed to, like The Unseen and Anti-Flag. I knew who Anti-Flag kind of were. Like, I knew they were this political punk band, basically. And there's a dude in my graduating class who was wearing an Anti-Flag hoodie, but I never heard their music before. And then I heard it on here. And then later on, I ended up. At that time, I still was burning CDs every once in a while, and I made like my own mix of like Anti-Flag songs that I really liked and Unseen songs that I really liked. But this really started to this was a tradition. This started really, to me, this album is what started the tradition of getting compilation albums. Even though I had bought some earlier, it wasn't like a thing that I sought out to do. And then I collected every one since then. And this is 2004. So put that back up here. But that's kind of what started it off. And there's a lot of memories with that. And I just saw the value. That's where I really saw the value, because that was the album where I started to be like, oh, let me look up this and let me look up that. And like, what about this thing? And what about that? Like, there's an Atmosphere song on there, and I don't really like it. What are the Keys to Life in 15 Minutes or something like that? It just wasn't really a great song. And then a couple years later, I met a girl, and she, really liked Atmosphere. And it was in the era of God Loves Ugly. I don't remember when that came out, but I mean, that's what she was listening to a lot, and eventually I kind of got into it a little bit, and now I love that album. It's my favorite album. But anyway, that at the time, that Atmosphere song was on there. It didn't do anything for me. Then later on, I was like, oh wait, I remember like Atmosphere. I would listen to it again. I'm like, yeah, the song still doesn't do anything for me, but the name was in my head anyway. And so yeah, that's kind of that. The next thing I want to talk about is, again, a specific album that really kind of hammered this home for me, the whole thing about compilation albums, and the importance of them, and why I love them, and we'll get into the generalities after, because it's important. So this is Unsound. This is, when did this come out, 2006? Yes. So I had already bought, a couple of the Vans Warped Tour albums at that point. I don't think there was any other compilation albums that I was buying, because there weren't many out there. You know what? I'm skipping something. We're going to get back to this. I could cut that out, but I'm not going to. My bad. I completely forgot about Headbangers Ball. Oops. So, Headbangers Ball. This is Volume 2, because it's just better than Volume 1. I have Volume 1 up there. It was good. Again, a double disc. You get a lot of tracks. Again, brought to you by MTV. However, this time, I don't think it's as exclusive to one label as it was before. It does say Roadrunner again, so maybe I'm wrong. But I can't imagine all these bands were on Roadrunner at the same time, because if that's true, that's insane. But anyway, again, we've got people that I already knew. Korn is on here, Megadeth is on here. I didn't really know much Megadeth. I just knew the name. But when this one came out, like, I got exposed to a lot of different artists. Like, with Headbangers Ball Volume 1, there was some stuff on there that was sick. There just wasn't as many strong songs that I liked. But, like, Mastodon, I didn't know who Mastodon was before that. March of the Fire Ants, that just... boom, 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 boom. Oh, I can't even do it. I shouldn't have even done that mouth noise. But that's such a sick riff, such a heavy song that like shifted my whole center of gravity when I heard that. And that's how I got the name Mastodon in my head. And then later on, I went and bought a Mastodon album and whatever. Lamb of God's on there as well. I didn't know who they were before that album. So that definitely, again, introduced me to some more metal bands that I ended up really, really loving a lot. This also did that. I never heard of Atreyu before this. Avenged Sevenfold had Unholy Confessions on here. I didn't know who they were, and that brought me to Waking the Fallen, because that's the album that single came off of, and that's my favorite Avenged Sevenfold album still. Every album after that just got worse and worse and worse for me, but I don't want to talk about it. Unearth as well. Like, I love Unearth, just like one of my top like metalcore bands that I just still really, really love. And I didn't know who they were before this. So again, here, like, I got exposed to a lot of heavy music. There was a little more accessibility for me this time to, I guess, look them up and stuff. But I did still buy stuff on the strength of that single. Like, I went and looked up Atreyu, and I bought Atreyu albums. I went and got Waking the Fallen from Avenged Sevenfold based on Unearth. I ended up getting 2 CDs burnt, and then it was, Stings of Conscience and The Oncoming Storm. And then it was in, like, good timing and stuff too, because it was like right around that time they opened for Slipknot when I saw Slipknot, and that would have been in 2005, I think, January in Saskatoon. Anyway, so yeah, it was again, this just like reinforced really, like, yeah, man, compilation albums. I want to find more and find more and find more. So that was a really good one too, and kind of just cemented what happened with Vans Warped Tour, but in a different genre of music. Getting back to Unsound. Okay, so this is from Epitaph's label, just artists that are on there. And I was just, at that point, I just wanted any compilation album I can find that didn't look corny, because some of these compilation albums look really corny, and you don't recognize anyone that's on there. And at that time, my money was still pretty precious, so I wanted to make sure that these were like top tier bands that I was getting exposure to. I knew from first to last on here, and I probably heard the name Matchbook Romance. I don't remember if I knew Escape the Fate before this, but yeah, there's a DVD in here as well, and then there's 17 audio tracks, and some of the DVD features are just music videos of the songs that are on here, and some of them are like the same artist but another song that wasn't the audio track, which is going to be important in a second. So around this time, I mentioned in high school I was pretty much just a metalhead and that was it. And I didn't really have a lot of exposure to good rap. I went from having this mainstream gangster rap type thing and then completely just denouncing all the raps ever, and then realizing why, and that was because I couldn't find anything I related to, and that it was phony of me and phony a lot of the times with what the artists were doing, and I just couldn't relate. It wasn't for me. Didn't make any sense to actually get into those bands and listen to them, etc. Bands, rap artists, whatever. So around this time, maybe a year before this or so, I remember, like I said, I had a girlfriend that introduced me to Atmosphere. I got a little bit into that. When I started writing graffiti, there was this dude who introduced me to Loop Troop and Promo, and these dudes in Europe that were had a lot of songs about graffiti writing and stuff like that, so that was cool. My stepsister sent me Audition, the album by POS, and that blew my socks off. And that's what really got me interested in, like, okay, look, I'm starting to like some rap now, because I'm finding rap that I can relate to, that's good underground hip-hop, and, like, I'm digging it. Did I mention Jedi Mind Tricks? I don't remember. But someone introduced me to Jedi Mind Tricks, and I really like Violent by Design, that album, some other albums, in that era, Servants in Heaven, Kings in Hell. So, yeah, I started to get into some underground stuff, but not very many, and I just didn't know how to find more stuff without it just being happenstance by accident. But then when my stepsister sent me POS's Audition, I was like, Rhymesayers, that sounds really familiar. Rhymesayers. And it was because Atmosphere was on Rhymesayers' label, because he started that label. That's his label. His being Sean or Slug. Atmosphere's technically two people. But anyway, so I was like, oh wow, like, who else is on this label? And that's how I found out about Greaves. And there's some other artists on there too. Blueprint. I know Evidence is on there. I'm trying to think of who else was on there at the time. Someone else I searched up, and I was like, oh wow, that's cool. But anyway, Greaves, I really got into his music as well. So that was the start of me kind of like researching stuff. But really, it was just that one label, and I didn't know how to I just didn't do a lot of research, and I just didn't know what I was doing. I got this album, again, Epitaph. At the time, all this stuff to me was like punk, screamo stuff. But right here, my friends, that is Sage Francis. Never heard of Sage Francis before. Didn't know who the heck he was. He was signed to Epitaph for one album. I believe it was just one album, which was, why does it escape my mind right now? A Healthy Distrust. Before that was Personal Journals. Or maybe it was those two albums he was on Epitaph with. Anyway, that might be right. Maybe it was both albums. But on here, these two songs on here, because one of them is the music video for Escape Artist, and the single that's on here is a remix of The Buzzkill, and both of those songs are off of A Healthy Distrust, and they're sick. And I heard that, and I was like, what is going on? Like, this dude is blowing my mind right now. Super hella intelligent, smart, poetic, amazing lyricist, quick raps. Like, he's got it. He's got it all. And I was just blown away once again. I was like, man, I found a couple things now that I really like that are rap. And he was like the only rapper signed to this label. He's the only rapper on this album. And had those 2 songs. I was like, man, I need more. And I downloaded a bunch of his tracks. And then later, I mean, when Human the Death Dance came out, I bought that, and it's still my favorite Sage Francis album. But this was just, again, kind of on a whim. I was like, I need more compilation albums in my life to expose me to stuff. I was purposely doing that. It's the power of the mixtape. That's really what it is. Someone curated this, not out of love in the same way that someone would make a mixtape for someone else, or being like, yo, like I'm going to make you a YouTube playlist, or whatever it is that you want to do, or to show someone a song. I really believe in the power of the mixtape. I really think that, I wish that I even did it more, but it's financially irresponsible in some ways. If I'm gonna, I don't know, I could send someone a single. People aren't generally using CDs anymore anyway. I mean, I still use a CD player in my car every single day, because sometimes it exposes me to, I'm like, oh, I bought a new album and I didn't get time to listen to it yet. I ripped it and I put it on my iPod, and I didn't really listen to it. If I put it in the car, I will listen to it while I commute to work or whatever, get groceries and stuff like that. But anyway, I found out about Sage Francis through this, and that is kind of significant, because Sage Francis is still my favorite rapper. He's hella just amazing. And that really cemented the fact that I can find really good rap. And I went and looked at his label. I went and looked at Strange Famous, and then I got introduced to more people, because he was selling people's albums that weren't even on his label, really. I think he had Cubby Bear's album on there at one point. But I know he had some. I mean, he even had some Atmosphere albums on there. There's other artists on his label that are just great. But yeah, it's just, I love Sage Francis, and he played a real big. I could have talked about maybe his album, Human the Death Dance, and how that's really significant. But yeah, it was just amazing. I don't want to make this all about him. Anyway, but that is just, again, the power of compilation albums. Because someone basically makes a mixtape and puts it out there. Again, they curated it in a certain way for a certain reason. It wasn't because they just love me so much. It's meant to be sold to the masses, and to expose them to different artists on their label, hoping that you'll like them. And I did. And I just think that they're still really important. However, we're not getting them because of technology, the ease of access to streaming services and social media and YouTube, and buying digital ones. Like I said, some of these labels now have digital compilations that they still have on there. Like Victory, I think, had one a couple times. Roadrunner, some other labels I can't remember the name of right now, metal labels that would have a compilation. Like I said, Metal Hammer and stuff puts that out. The Deep Elm digital compilation album, that's out there. But yeah, it's still a good way to check out new music. However, these compilation albums are getting made less and less and less, and they're just not getting put out there. And honestly, I don't listen to them as much as I used to. They don't have as much value for me as I used to, or anyone, because we all, not all, but generally so many people have such an accessibility to the internet that you can look that stuff up. I still read music magazines. I find out about bands by other bands all the time, just being on their Instagram or on their Facebook, or what have you in social media. So there's a lot of other ways I found out about them, but these were super important to me at the span of I don't know how many years of my life. Towards the end of high school and the first couple of years out of high school. For sure. And I said, just to carry on the tradition, I still bought every single Vans Warped Tour album that came out, because I still did find out some cool bands through there that I just wouldn't have found otherwise. And for the value, like $10 for one of those, that's amazing for what I was getting out of it. That's kind of wrapping up the compilation album thing. It kind of got into the mixtape a little bit in the concept of that. I really think it's a great thing, is being able to share your love of music with someone, whether it's the label sharing their bands or whatever, but sharing that in such a way where you have this curated list and mix of different things that you think someone might enjoy, and then they do. And obviously these are promotional tools, these are meant to sell, these are, marketing things. and also I'm trying to talk about just the love of music and how you can share that with an individual through making a mixtape or something like that, which is always fun to do. It has a lot of meaning behind it usually. But these albums, compilation albums, played a big role in my life. I got introduced to so many artists I wouldn't have otherwise, or it would have taken me years before I did. These are time capsules in a way as well sometimes, and they're just, they played a big role in me being exposed to many artists that I know and love still to this day, and compilation albums were freaking fantastic, and that's that.